I got to tell you guys about a few new products over at our favorite CBD store. That's, of course, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. The first thing I'm going to tell you about that's brand new over there is these THCV gummies. There's 10 milligrams of THCV per gummy and 10 gummies per jar. A lot of y'all are probably familiar with this THCV. Some people call it diet weed. It's very good for intermittent fasters. THCV helps suppress or dull your appetite, which, of course, a little bit unlike regular THC that, as you probably know, or at least you've heard, can give you the munchies. THCV helps promote energy, unlike regular THC, which of course makes you feel kind of mellow. This is legal, oh my God, legal under the Farm Bill. So thank you, Farm Bill. The second thing I want to tell you about that's new over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com is their full spectrum nano CBD soft gels. These have the perfect amount of CBD with THC. 25 milligrams of CBD and 0.27 milligrams of THC per soft gel. Their everyday formula brings your body back to homeostasis and adds this nice extra layer of chill. I like that. I think you do too. A lot of us need that now and again, or maybe every day. Nanotechnology allows better absorption into your body, even better than their other products, which was already amazing. Again, this has a calming effect and it lasts about 6 to 8 hours. And of course, like the other stuff, it's legal under what? The Farm Bill. Thank you, Farm Bill. It's legal. I would not get you guys in trouble. Go over to PalomaVerdeCBD.com. They've got a lot of great products. I talk about them all the time. The massage oil. They've got the sleep bundle. They got nano CBD soft gels, CBD bath bombs, which are amazing. Gummies, tinctures, all of that stuff. Of course, for my French bulldogs, Lux and George, the pet tinctures and the pet gummies. All of these things are over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Oh yeah, did I tell you about the cool menthol sports cream? Of course I have before. It's the best sports cream in the world. I get reviews from customers on this all the time. That's the number one thing I like from this company. And they've got all of these great things. Over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com, you will get a promo code because Carlos and Vanessa, the owners, love this show and they want to help out the listeners of this show. Promo code BUCK at checkout gets you 20% off of your order over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code BUCK at checkout gets you 20% off of your order. Go give them business and in turn, give me business. Now, let's get back to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, the icon, the hologram graph, but I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus, but I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
Hey, you guys, welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. As always, I'm your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson. Great to have you with me once again this week. Hope your summer's going well. Today, it sounds like such a cheerful topic, right? The apocalypse, globalization, the Antichrist. Well, I think you're going to enjoy this interview, and it's with GM Davis. He wrote a book that, boy, did I go through this one quickly, despite the fact that, let me see, I've got it here with me. It's, well, I mean, that's not too thick. It's about 350 pages. And just to give you kind of an idea of it, here's some of the chapter titles. Who is the Antichrist? The Principles of Globalization, Gnosticism, and the Rise of the West. Globalization of economics, globalization of politics. We get into a lot of these topics today, and it's a very cool perspective of looking at history and then, of course, looking into the future as well. And we touch upon, obviously, where we're at with everything right now. And you hear a lot of historians. I've had historians on this show that only go back, I don't know, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, sometimes even 400, 500 years. We go back a lot further. The lens that GM Davis is looking through here illuminates a lot of, let's say, consistent themes throughout history. A lot of Gnosticism going on here, and we go back well over 1,000 years. So I think you're going to find this to be an interesting interview, and I'm glad to have, it took a little bit of work to get this gentleman on here, but nonetheless, he's here going to talk about the apocalypse, globalization, the Antichrist, all of these cheerful things. And I'll tell you about my guest, GM Davis, really quick, and we'll bring him on. He earned his BA in political science in 97, his PhD in the same field. That was from Stanford University in 03. His dissertation, we get to talking about this here, but his dissertation was Meaning and History, the Origins of Totalitarianism in the Decline of Mysticism and the Rise of Interworldly Religion. He was raised Lutheran, but fell into atheism before joining an evangelical Protestant group. He was received into the Orthodox Church at Joy of All Who Sorrow, OCA in 03. In this book that we're talking about, Antichrist, the Fulfillment of Globalization, was published by Uncut Mountain Press in 2022. He's married, lives in New England, and today he's on Counterflow. Dr. G.M. Davis, welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy you could do this. I started trying to search for you online initially once I got this book, and it was not the easiest thing to find contact information, but lo and behold, here we are. I would like you to give my audience an intro for yourself, kind of whatever you find pertinent that they should know, and then we'll jump into this.
I am a political scientist by trade. That's how I've been trained. And I did my dissertation, we completed it in 2003. And it was really a question as to what happened in modern Western civilization, such that we saw the rise of these intensively destructive ideologies like communism and National Socialism. How could this happen? And of course, there's all sorts of important historical circumstances to mention. But I argued that they became a replacement for traditional Christianity. That with the abandonment of traditional Christianity, a vacuum had opened socially in the West that people needed to fill. They had an existential need to fill it. And something like communism, which promises a worker's paradise and the withering away of the state, or National Socialism, which similarly promises a 1,000-year reign by the folk, the Aryan master race, that these were ersatz religions, in effect, even while they maybe didn't mention God at all. But what I didn't know when I wrote my dissertation, I didn't really have a very good idea as to what traditional Christianity meant. You might naturally think of Roman Catholicism. And of course, that is a more traditional type of Western Christianity. But really, Orthodoxy is traditional Christianity, and more importantly is the church, which is a living, breathing body of which Christ is the head. No pope, no bishop. He is the head, and the church is the body. And it is from that which Western civilization deviated from 1,000 years ago. And then through that period of time, through the last millennium, there have been all these sorts of deviations from orthodoxy, many of them ostensibly Christian, but which nonetheless proved enormously destructive. The Latin Inquisition, the Crusades, the Protestant Reformation with the wars of religion that killed millions of people, different Christians trying to kill each other to the tune of millions. That's what happens when you depart from the Orthodox Church. And these movements culminated ultimately in things like the French Revolution, communism, National Socialism, and in our era now, we have globalization, which is a secular movement to build a paradisal, global, unified civilization on earth without the church. And that's the great danger today.
And then that's where this book comes in that you've written, Antichrist, the Fulfillment of Globalization. And that's what I kind of want to get into that now. And you had mentioned to me off air, this book that you've written that we're going to discuss is basically a more complete version of that dissertation that you were, it kind of fills in the gaps, so to speak. Is that correct?
Yeah, the dissertation, I mean, the remarkable fact is that I was at one of the leading institutions for higher learning on earth, studying political science. And nowhere did I come into contact with Eastern Orthodox Christianity. It's like it never existed. The 1,000-year Roman Byzantine Empire, nobody talked about it. Nobody studied it. Nobody cared. And it was only after I left and had completed the dissertation that then I encountered orthodoxy. And that is really the key to the whole argument. Because the question becomes, if you look at communism, you look at National Socialism, you start asking questions, where did the error begin? Was it the 20th century? Well, if you go farther back, you encounter the French Revolution that killed hundreds of thousands of people. Well, did it start there? Maybe it was before, in the wars of religion in the 17th century that killed millions. Maybe it was the Protestant Reformation. You keep going back, and really, I believe the key moment was in the 11th century, when the papacy became what is effectively a monarchy, a self-appointed judge of all things spiritual and temporal, and broke from the Orthodox Church. And that's where the rise of the West really begins as a separate civilization, in my mind, 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That was the key moment. And we're still seeing this play out today.
It seems like instinctively, I don't know, maybe this is a Western mindset. Maybe it's specifically an American mindset. I'm still thinking about that myself. Is a lot of folks instinctively think that things always get better as time progresses forward. In other words, the past was just, we were ruled by racists, backward thinking Neanderthals. But in the future, everything gets better. Modern people are smarter. Modernity is a good thing. What do you think the problem is with that view of history and time?
Well, Eric Voegelin, who was one of the greatest political scientific minds of the modern era, in my view, really captured it well in what he believed was the rise of Gnosticism. And Gnosticism is a very old way of looking at things that competed with the church in the first centuries. But the movements in the modern era have Gnostic attributes. And so on the one hand, we have this advancement, technical advancement. We have more information, we have more goods, we have rocket ships and aircraft and MRI machines and all sorts of dazzling technological achievements. But this has been at the expense of what he would call the life of the spirit. the orientation of the individual soul towards God. And the Orthodox understand this. The great heroes of the Orthodox Church, well, firstly, they're martyrs. And secondly, they're ascetics who cut off their own will and their own passions to be oriented towards God and the next life. The West basically forsook all that and decided instead to build an ever-expanding temporal civilization, which is truly dazzling. There's no question. I mean, when you think of the alchemists and the wizards and sorcerers of medieval society, we have so transcended their wildest dreams with modern technology. But the problem, again, is that you lose your orientation towards God, not necessarily in as much as technology can be used for good or ill. But the problem is, practically, it's become an idol. People worship at the footstool of modern technology, that it can solve our existential problems, which it can't. There's only one place for an existential solution, and that is with God. And God is found in his church.
You mentioned Gnosticism. I'm glad you've already mentioned it because I wanted to ask you about it. It's a point that's talked about throughout your book, and coincidentally, you mentioned Vogelin because of your book and all of the footnotes referencing him. I got his book too, the new Science of Politics, and again, it's mentioned in this book quite a bit. And just so my listeners are clear on what we're discussing here, how would you define Gnosticism or the Gnostic, et cetera? What is that?
Well, it's basically a movement that came out of the first centuries of Christianity, which posited that there was secret knowledge that was accessible to an elite group. And this is to be contrasted with the Orthodox Church. In the Orthodox Church, there are no secrets. It is 100% democratic. Everybody can partake of the holy mysteries, which is to say the body and blood of Christ. Everybody is called upon to pray, to fast, to give alms. There's no secret to be found that gives you an easy road to salvation. The Lord said, take up your cross and follow me. Whereas gnosis basically says the opposite, says that there's a secret that you can unlock that is the key to effectively salvation and an easy road. And there's a structure then that comes out of this. And we see it even in the modern era. Basically, a Gnostic divides history into three phases. There's the phase of ignorance, before the special knowledge, whatever it might be, it could be almost anything, before the special knowledge is discovered. Then there's the phase of history when, we found it. Now we know the key, the secret. And the third phase, which never comes, is the phase when that knowledge is universally applied and we live in a new state of paradise. And this structure, this Gnostic structure, can be seen throughout history, throughout the Christian era. It really started with Joachim of Fiore in the 13th century. And he believed St. Francis of Assisi would be the new leader that would lead people into the Gnostic third realm of paradise in the year 1260. Of course, 1260 came, nothing happened, and that's usually the way it works. National Socialism is another good example. There were the prophets of National Socialism like Hegel and Nietzsche. There's the leader of National Socialism, of course, Adolf Hitler. And the idea that they will live in a 1,000-year paradise, which, of course, ends in world destruction. But there's this same structure through history that can be seen through all these heresies that really began in the early part of the second millennium.
I know a lot of us, including myself, are a little bit worried about where things are going financially with this economy and all of these things. I've got the spot for you to go and get some help with this, and it's free. It is free, Free, which is a good thing with inflation the way it is. Upcoming, it's an online summit by my friend Mikkel Thorup from expatmoney.com with over 30 experts who are focused on moving your life, business, and wealth offshore. It's at expatmoneysummit.com. That is expatmoneysummit.com. I'm going to tell you the best part about this entire thing at the end of this ad. A beloved figure in our movement will be in attendance to help you guys talk through some of these things, but stay tuned. The topics there include securing your own Plan B safe haven, how to use foreign currencies, offshore banking, and decentralized finance to safeguard your money, how to legally reduce your tax burden, how and where to safely store gold, silver, and other precious metals, where the best countries in the world are to find freedom for yourself and your family, how you can get a second passport to travel the globe without restrictions and get in and out of different countries' borders. You will learn about a libertarian island haven, private cities, communities on the ocean, and food and energy independent towns in Latin America. You can register now for free at expatmoneysummit.com. Guess who's going to be in attendance at this event? Ron Paul, the greatest politician. I don't even like using that word for him. The greatest man to ever grace the halls of Congress in this country. The beloved, the wonderful Ron Paul will be a part of this. This is your way to fight back against what is happening in the world. Stand up, protect yourself, and find out how to secure your new life abroad. Register now for free, expatmoneysummit.com. Let's get back to the show. There's a mention even in this. I love how you do kind of what you just said in this book. You go through these periods of time and kind of show, look, this Gnosticism rears its head again all the way up till, I think it's very obvious for people listening and watching this. We understand that there's people doing this exact same thing right now. You can look at the World Economic Forum, for example, trying to provide us with these, it's just a secret group of people. We know some of their faces, but a lot of them we won't know. But they have these plans for us. We don't get a say in this. They have these plans for us. Oh no, this is going to be better. You're going to live in these pods and you're not going to actually own anything. But again, that's if you learn from history, especially the history talked about in your book, we can see that that's going down a road that we don't want to go down, let's say. But a lot of people aren't going to think, well, I bet you the Reformation was rooted in Gnostic heresies. Can you talk about the Reformation and some of the issues with that?
Well, the Reformation was really, I think you could say, a logical concomitant to the papacy's defection from orthodoxy in the 11th century, because the papacy had basically said that it alone had the right and the authority to dictate what is Christianity. as well as various temporal aspects also. And Protestantism basically just said, well, if it's good enough for the Pope, it's good enough for everybody else. Why can't we, whoever we are, determine what is Christian and what isn't? And you have the principle of sola scriptura, only scripture, you have people fighting over how to interpret the Bible. Before, that was contained within Roman Catholicism. And then it broke out in the 16th century. And there was also, very importantly, an economic incentive involved, because the kings and princes of Europe, Central Europe, wanted to get their hands on Roman Catholic property, monasteries which were very wealthy, and so on. And suddenly they had an incentive to do that within the Protestant Reformation. Certainly that's what happened in England. But the principle, the Gnostic principle, appears there with the idea that, look, we have special knowledge of Scripture that the Pope doesn't have, and that other reformist sect, whatever it might be, doesn't have. We do. And we're going to impose that through force majeure. And so you get religious warfare over these competing Gnostic sects. Everybody thinks they have the truth. Everybody thinks they have the knowledge of the mind of God. And everybody's trying to impose it through force.
Mm-hmm. There's people that look at history. I know a historian that does this, and he'll say that modern American liberalism has its roots in Puritanism, and therefore Christianity, because people in the Western mindset look at the Puritanism and the puritanical mindset as a Christian mindset. But again, kind of what you just touched upon, you write about that being Gnostic anti-Christianity of the Puritans. Can you talk about that?
Sure. No, it's the Puritans are an excellent example. On the one hand, they are Christian. They're self-consciously Christian. There's no doubt about that. But on the other hand, what they're saying is that we have the knowledge, the right, the power, the authority to rebuild the world in what we imagine to be the image of God. And the new world, namely America, was going to be the shining city on a hill. And that's, of course, taken from the gospel, that phrase. And that's the Lord talking about his church, that you will be as a shining city on a hill. What's he talking about? He's not talking about the United States. Sorry. He's talking about his church. Now, if a country, a nation wants to follow Christian principles, well, that's excellent. That's what they should be trying to do. But what the Puritans had in mind was a wholesale rediscovery, if you will, of the knowledge of God that would allow them to build a new society, a salvific society in the new world. And so we see this today in the American mindset, American exceptionalism. We're not like other countries. We don't believe we are. We believe we're special. And of course, materially speaking and historically speaking, you can make that argument that America has been especially blessed. We're protected by 2 large oceans. We've never had our homeland really directly attacked, War of 1812 aside. We've conquered brilliantly in the 20th century in the world wars. We beat our foe, the Soviet Union. And now really all the rest of the world has to do is follow us into the global promised land. And so America is at the forefront, really, of globalization. And certain things like capitalism and democracy and these bromides that are trotted out in support of ongoing globalization.
You wrote something that a lot of my longtime listeners will appreciate a lot. And that was, here's the quote: "While independent, private corporations, the world's central banks are often considered as extensions of their respective governments. It is probably more apt to think of the situation in reverse. The world's governments are extensions of the central banks." I think this is key to the entire discussion of globalization. Can you talk about the role of central banks and how they can devalue dollars if they want, basically moving towards a global world order, and how much control they really have in this?
Well, every country now has a central bank. Certainly every major country. The European countries are under the European Central Bank. And it's significant to recall that central banking was one of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. And not for no reason. It was there because that's how you really control a society, by controlling its money. And so the central banks have unlimited power, really, to create money and to destroy it, to print it up physically or to create it digitally, which is the preferred method now, or to destroy it. But that power is not in the hands of a government. That power is in the hands of these corporations. And these central banks, while they work along with governments, are still independent. And they comprise the leading commercial banks in a given country. And really, the alchemists struggled for centuries to try and make gold out of base metals to create money, because that's what money used to be. It used to be gold and silver. Now it's digital. And so really that alchemical power has been realized in the hands of the central banks. And what we're looking at now increasingly is central bank digital currency, so that everybody then will have an account, if you're an American, at the Federal Reserve, and that can be switched on or off, depending on how the powers that be regard you. Maybe you've written a book they don't like. Maybe you've given an interview they don't like. And this has already happened in certain circumstances. People have had their bank accounts switched off. Not so much in this country. But it's coming. And that is really a key power to the ongoing centralization of power, which is at the heart of globalization. And furthermore, to look at the actual prophecies regarding the end of the world, which I get into. We know that when Antichrist finally comes, he will control the world's money through the mark that he gives. That's very clear in the book of Revelation, that he will give to great and small a mark without which they will not be able to exchange on the world's markets. And so we're seeing this centralization, this digitalization of money continue in our time. And it's been foreseen.
Yeah, the bankers of today, I mean, it's almost like they're sorcerers and magicians, they would have been that in the days of old. Now they've got this special, again, gnosis that gives them, unfortunately, massive amount of power over us, How is another section you write about that I want to ask you about was wonderful. Maybe one of my favorite sections in the book is democracy, and then you back it with, perfectly backed with, a section on propaganda. And I guess I can just ask it this way. How is the modern democratic man, and I don't mean democratic as in Democratic Party, but rather a little d democracy man, how is man in our modern democracy an easier target for something like, let's say, propaganda?
I think because he's convinced he's not. Democratic man, small d, is persuaded that he is self-governing. That's really what democracy implies. And if you think you're self-governing, if you think you're beyond the control of others, then you're more likely to be led into control because you're not on the lookout for it. And democracy, Lord Acton has the adage, power corrupts. We're all familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to think of it applying to kings, maybe princes, presidents, prime ministers, that power corrupts these people. And indeed it does. But in a democracy, the logic of a democracy is that it's the people who have the power. Now, whether they do or not, just hold for a second, but they think they do. And that corruption applies to them as it applies to a king or a prime minister. If you think you're self-governing, if you think you're rational, if you think you are, but you're not, then you're prone to manipulation. And democratic man is ruled really by his passions.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to think of passions in a negative way. Certainly the Orthodox Church continues to look at them in a negative way. But now they're a positive thing. Somebody who's passionate. Oh, that's good. That's great. Or you think of the word pride. Pride's a capital sin. Pride is what caused Lucifer to fall from heaven. We don't want to be proud, but yet we're encouraged to be proud in our democracy. We're self-governing, self-ruling, and we're proud of it. And what really this makes us is a dupe of those who control our passions. And the people who control our passions are those who run the money system, run the governments, run media. They prey on our passions, on our pride, on lust, on greed. All these things are stoked in us by the atmosphere around us. Even while we're thinking, oh, no, I can make up my own mind and my own decisions. We need to realize that we are in jeopardy all the time of being manipulated. And it's only when you begin to realize that and begin to look out, can you, in fact, become more independent, more rational. But it's not an easy process to go through. And it means recognizing that we live in what is, in fact, a very hostile environment. Hostile physically, hostile spiritually, hostile morally. And that we're constantly in danger of being manipulated.
One of my favorite sponsors is back with us here on Counterflow. That would be Texas Scorecard. Anytime you want to find out anything that's going on in the Texas political scene without a bad propagandized media narrative, just visit Texas Scorecard. They were founded in 2015 by a former Ron Paul congressional press secretary. They're Texas-based, they're Texas-focused counterculture media organization. They've got so many cool things over at Texas Scorecard. Lots of podcasts, videos. Actually, I was a part of that. You can find a video there of me being interviewed in the Texas Scorecard studio. They've got live programming. They've got a print edition. They've got a very popular daily email newsletter highlighting the biggest stories of the day. They've even got a program to help grow the next generation of disruptors, and we like that. Their mission, disrupt statism and reconstitute self-governments. They are pro-citizen. They serve the grassroots against big government through narrative, tools, and information. They do not align with any party. I think that's very important. They work to hold lawmakers on both sides of the aisle accountable. They're a nonprofit. There's no paywalls. You guys aren't going to have to pay for any of this. Their reporting is always free. Find them on all social media channels by searching Texas Scorecard. They're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all of that. You can sign up for their free daily newsletter at texasminute.com. That is texasminute.com. Think about this. They support this program for you guys. So just give them a look. Texas Scorecard. Anytime you want to find out the real deal of what's going on in the Texas political scene, Texas Scorecard is your one-stop shop. Let's get back to the show. There's a segment, I would say, certainly in the libertarian world, that I would say they view moral behavior as constricting, maybe, and that true freedom is really the ability to do whatever feels good to you, to seek pleasure, and there shouldn't be any moralistic laws against stuff that you want to do to make you feel good, as long as you're not hurting someone else, is what they often say. Do you think that's a victory for propagandists? Incite the passions, control the man type of thing?
Yes, definitely. You put it very well. Incite the passions, control the man. That's right. And the idea that freedom is doing whatever you want, which implies indulging your passions, is exactly the opposite of what the classical and traditional Christian tradition tells us is freedom. Freedom is cutting off our passions. Freedom is humbling ourselves. It's the exact opposite of, if it feels good, do it. And so freedom has been turned on its head. It's really been an Orwellian sort of exercise that's happened in our time. People believe they're free if they get to do whatever they want. No, that's slavery to your passions. St. Augustine put it very well.
There was a time on this podcast where I would have thought that talking about the Enlightenment as being evil or bad would have been kind of edgy, and that I'm really pushing the boundaries on saying something like that. But it's a sentiment now that I believe is certainly a lot more common with people that listen to this show. How do you view the Enlightenment as a negative thing, and maybe a further step towards this globalization that we're talking about?
Well, yeah, the Enlightenment was part of the modern Gnostic revolution. The idea that really, you look at Descartes, if you look at Newton, the idea that the end all of human endeavor is to acquire power over nature. And that's really what modern science is about. It's power over nature. And that's also what magic used to be about, and to some extent still is. It's just that science is sort of systematic magic. And again, things like science can be used for good or ill. They're not necessarily wrong or bad. But the problem is that they've come to be idolized. There's come to be the belief, modern science has grown out of the Enlightenment, and the idea that we can save the planet or colonize the solar system. These ideas have a salvific ring to them. We're not spending our time struggling in the way of the cross anymore. We're trying to fix the world around us, which fell into sin in the Garden of Eden. And we're trying to redeem it through science, through Enlightenment principles. And so we are missing the point, really, where we've become, we've abandoned what has been given to us by God in the church, the salvific message of the gospel.
A word that I think a lot of people listening may not be too familiar with is ecumenism. And that's something discussed in your book, and certainly it leads to, or it's a step further towards globalization that we're talking about, this one world order and so on. Can you talk about, I sometimes I say ecumenism and sometimes I say ecumenism. I have a hard time with the word myself, but can you talk about that word and why, kind of what it is and why you see it as a step towards globalization?
Yes, ecumenism is a key step in the process of globalization. And globalization is something that's been going on for centuries. And ecumenism is sort of the religious element of globalization. The idea that all Christian denominations need to be reunited under some banner, or even beyond that, that all religions need to be united. And it denies the basic claim of orthodoxy to be God's church here and now in its fullness. Orthodoxy rejects the idea that there was a branching of the church, that there was separation from the papacy, there was separation under Protestantism, further separation in the modern era. There are all these separations, but the church herself, which is Orthodox, remains. And so the undertaking of ecumenism is fundamentally at odds with Orthodox ecclesiology. But the idea is that someday we'll have a unified world religion, just like we'll have a unified world economy, we'll have a unified world state. All these things that people have been calling for generations someday will happen. But it will be fundamentally fraudulent. It will not be the church. It will be an anti-church. And coming to crown that church, just as he's coming to crown a world economy and crown a world state, is the Antichrist. And that he comes at the end of the process of globalization. Whenever that occurs, we don't know.
How does Russia constitute kind of a roadblock for this push towards globalization? How does Russia interfere with some of this in your mind?
Well, of course, the situation with Russia right now is very complicated. But Russia has tried, since the demise of the Soviet Union, to regain her position as an Orthodox great power. Russia, of course, before Bolshevism in 1917, had been an Orthodox empire with all its faults, but still a self-conscious Orthodox empire. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was basically 10 years of intense chaos and destitution in Russia in the 1990s when she tried to become Western. And over the past 20 years or so, there's been a recovery of her national identity, which has included a revival in Russian Orthodoxy. Now, some of this is controversial, and certainly the attack on Ukraine, as the saying goes, it was worse than a crime, it was a mistake. But Russia sees herself as self-consciously independent of the Western-dominated global world, even while she is still to a great degree integrated into it. And the war has pushed her farther out, away from Western globalization. And what the war will bring, how it will end, we don't know. I don't know. But her self-conscious existence is a roadblock to Western globalization that wants to pull every country into a Western-dominated order. I mean, if the globalists had their way, Russia would be broken up and her constituent parts pulled into the Western order in a subservient way. And Russia knows this. And that was part of the reason that she felt backed into a corner and lashed out.
What do you want people to take away from this book, Antichrist, the Fulfillment of Globalization? What are some of the things you really want people to pull from this?
Well, that the Orthodox Church is God's church on earth. It's the most important thing. And we are all called to be part of it. And we have to be careful, especially now with, for example, the war in Ukraine. We have to be careful not to confuse national interests with the church. There is a Russian Orthodox Church. It's the largest church in the Orthodox world. Being part of it, however, does not make one a Russian propagandist. We have to keep these things in mind. But for the book itself, I guess what I'd like people to know is that the process that they see around them of globalization, which has been going on for ages, generations certainly, does have an ultimate conclusion. And that conclusion is the coming of the Antichrist. And we need to be very careful and sober when we talk about the end of the world. It's very easy to get pulled into rabbit holes. It's very easy to start throwing dates around, like, oh, I saw a book the other day on Amazon. I think it said, 2027 will be the end of the world. Maybe it will. Maybe it'll be 2026. Maybe it'll be 2030. Maybe it'll be 2487. We don't know. That's been made very clear. Nobody knows the date nor hour. But Antichrist will come and he will rule. And we are called as children of God not to succumb to him or to his regime. That's spelled out very clearly in the book of Revelation.
All right. Well, I can't let you get out of here without, and I know this because we spoke offline, but without asking you about Father Seraphim Rose and what he stands for, what he means to you. A lot of my listeners now have written to me and said that they've purchased books that he wrote. So he means something to a lot of people now. But what does he mean for you?
Well, first of all, I regard him as a saint in the American church. Of course, he hasn't been finally canonized yet, but I have no doubt someday he will. I feel that it was through his writings that I really came to Orthodoxy. In particular, his book Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. For me, that book, more than any other, makes sense of the modern world. And it makes sense of the church and what the church is experiencing now and will in the future. So I have the highest possible opinion of Father Seraphim Rose. And I believe many people in this country and many people in Russia also regard him very highly and as a saint. And in fact, his works, we think of him as an American, of course, which he was, but really his works were extremely popular in Russia, written out in samizdat form under the communist regime. And, he's a tremendous gift from God for us in America, and indeed for all of Orthodoxy. And I have to say plainly that without him, I probably would not have written the book. because he really guided me. By which I mean his books, his literature, have guided me in my own life in the church.
Well put. Well, I would love for you to plug anything you'd like. First of all, this is the book for the people watching. You can see the cover, Antichrist, the Fulfillment of Globalization. I assume, in fact, maybe I did get it. No, I didn't get it on Amazon. I'll let you tell people where they can get it.
Well, they can get it at Uncut Mountain Press, which is the publisher, at their website, or at Amazon. So whatever's convenient. I think it's a little cheaper at Uncut Mountain Press. And that's just spelled out, uncutmountainpress.com.
Do you have any online presence that you want to plug at all? Social media, websites, anything?
Not really, no. Maybe I will in future. The only thing I might mention is that there's going to be a conference at the Antiochian Village in Pennsylvania, October 6th through 9th, hosted by Uncut Mountain Press. Though I hear it's filled up, but I think if you really want to get there, you can get there and get a hotel outside the village and attend the talks. I will be there, as will Father Josiah Trenham, Robert Spencer, and several other people I can't quite remember at the moment. So that should be an interesting time.
Very cool. Are you getting pretty good feedback on this book? Are you getting feedback on this book? Because I had to search for you for, I had a special route to get to you, but are you getting feedback on it?
A little. So far, I hear from Father Peter Heers, who's at Uncut Mountain Press, that he's hearing good things. What exactly that means, I'm not sure. And then so far, I've had some positive reviews at Amazon. It hasn't been out that long, but thank God it's out, because really it's. I really wrote the book. I should add, I really wrote the book in 2009, 2010, and then just did a little tweaking. I one of the reasons it came out so late was because nobody wanted to publish it.
Wow.
So then I bumped into Father Peter Heers, and he was game. So here we are 12 years later, I guess. Hopefully I think I'm pretty confident that the principles that I touch on are still current and up to date. Even if there might be a few things that happened recently that aren't there.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess you've looked around and noticed, we're more steps closer to globalization than we were, unfortunately, when you wrote this book.
Yeah, no, the process continues. There's no question, and maybe I'll add, if we have a minute. That I draw on a lot of people, a lot of writers, other people who have made observations that are relevant, both good and bad. But for example, H.G. Wells, whom I mentioned, he was the one who coined the term New World Order. And also another term which I found very helpful. There you go. The open conspiracy. Because a lot of people ask the question, well, is there some sort of nefarious conspiracy behind globalization? And I guess my answer is, I don't know. A conspiracy by nature is occult or hidden, so it's hard to find by nature. Doesn't mean you can't find it. And just because you can't find it doesn't mean it's not there. So there may be there. But what Wells talked about was an open conspiracy, which is to say that basically everybody who's anybody, if you're an academic, if you're a celebrity, if you're a politician, if you're a banker, all these people would in time come to an agreement that globalization was necessary to end war and suffering. And this is what we see today. Basically, every person who's on television, whether they're, again, a banker, a statesman, a celebrity, a politician, whoever it is, they're all in favor of globalization. And it's all right out there in front of us. And this is what Wells called the open conspiracy. Mm-hmm. And I think that was just bang on. There could be hidden dark conspiracies, but there is certainly an open one that may not need a nefarious conspiracy because it's so much everywhere.
And just, I want to add something here at the end too. A lot of these things that we're talking about, it's not necessarily some armed gulag that's threatening people. A lot of these things, from the way I see it, will play on people's laziness, self-worship, and all of these things that make you more comfortable. They're like you just mentioned, globalization to help prevent wars and things like this, even though we keep seeing more wars. But again, I don't necessarily think this is going to be a gun pointed at to scare people. A lot of the time, this will play on people's, for lack of a better term, laziness and need to be pleasured, again, seeking pleasure and things like that.
No, I think you're right. And that goes back to our discussion of propaganda.
Yes.
And so-called democracy. I think you're right. I think that not H.G. Wells, but Aldous Huxley
yes.
Basically predicted a sort of soft totalitarianism where people would be led by their passions and sort of goaded into this kind of sleepwalking kind of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there may well be, you look at a country like China, there may well be gulags and whatnot. But we know that the ultimate form of repression is when the people themselves enforce the tyranny.
Yes. Yes. Unfortunately, we saw that tenfold over 2020 and 2021. If I were to have 10 cars at my house in summer of 2020 with friends over, the cops didn't necessarily need to cruise the streets to find out that you could have a neighbor just call on you. They were more than willing to work for the state for free. And that's exactly what we saw very often in 2020 and 2021, unfortunately, but you're spot on. Well, Mr. Davis, GM Davis, Dr. GM Davis, thank you so much for being here on Counterflow.
All right, Buck. Well, thank you.
Yes, sir. So go get that book if this interview was interesting to you. It's a good one, and I like giving business to companies like uncutmountainpress.com. So go give them a shout out. Go give them some business. Tell them you heard them here on Counterflow. As for this show, if you'd like to help, If you find value in this show every week, or maybe you just drop in every month or so, and you find value, you can contribute to this show. And every penny I make goes right back into the show. I can promise you. It's over at patreon.com/counterflow. And to find all of my links, of course, you can just go to counterflowpodcast.com. What else we got? Follow me on Twitter at BuckRebel, BuckRebel. And let me say something really quick. Last week, Noel Maring was a guest on the show. And I always tell you guys now, go to the YouTube page, hit subscribe, just search Counterflow with Buck Johnson. You'll find us there and watch these videos if that's how you like consuming this kind of thing. Well, I messed up. It was not my producers. These guys are the best. And it was my mess up on my end with the platform that I used to record this. So the video last week with Noel Maring could not be put out. It's still there on YouTube. It's just kind of a still shot of the artwork for this show. So I apologize. That was my bad. I screwed up with Riverside. That's the platform that we use. So that one was not there, although the audio is still there up on YouTube. Sorry about that, guys. Sorry about that. I hope you enjoyed this one on YouTube, as you could see us both. And as much as I can, the video will always be up on YouTube, unless I screw up. So thank you guys for all the support. As always, until next week, have a good one.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.